Okay, so welcome. Thank you for being here. In name of the Role, it's the 5th Symposium of RPG, Larp, and Education from Brazil. And today we are going to talk to you about game design and your practice, your work in this area. We have here Jason Morningstar. That's an indie role-playing game designer, creator of games such as Grey Ranks and Fiasco. And we have Evan Toner. It's a PhD as an associate professor of German studies at the University of Cincinnati. Is that it?
Yes.
Okay. And Eliane Bettocchi, that I pronounce it, Eliane Bettocchi. It's a PhD associate professor at University of Cincinnati as well, that works with 2D art and is CYW side development associate. Is that right, Eliane?
Well, I'm an adjunct instructor at
Okay.
University of Cincinnati. I'm associate professor at Federal University of Juiz de Fora.
Oh, Juiz de Fora. Okay. Yeah. So I am associate professor as well at Universidade Federal de Pelotas. And I teach game design for tabletop RPG here in South Brazil. And well, it's a pleasure to be here with you, and we want to hear a lot from you. For starts, I guess I'll ask you for introducing yourselves, not this brief introduction that I gave, but for you to introduce yourselves and tell us about your experience with TTRPG. Who would like to start?
I'll start. So thank you for the introduction. I'm Jason Morningstar, and my company is Bully Pulpit Games, which is a very small company. We are 2 co-owners and then just a handful of contractors that are making tabletop role-playing games and live-action role-playing games. And we've been in business since 2005, and I've been making games all my life of various kinds. My first published tabletop role-playing game was in 2005. And since then, I've made many games in many different formats. And I also do some consulting around teaching and learning and playful experiences, both for companies and in academia. And that's me. Does that sound about right, Evan?
It does. It does.
Okay, good.
I'm Evan Torner. I've been in the tabletop space since 1991 when I started playing, I guess, when I was very young. And so I've been game mastering for that long. And that also means I see myself very much in the tabletop convention organizing space. And I actually got into games academia as a game master who heard a lot of nonsense from academics and thought, we need to correct what they're saying about tabletop role-playing games. And that's that. It's funny. And I actually met Eliane and Jason really in the same year, which was 2012, in different circumstances, but both times in Finland, actually. So there are some interesting stories I'm not going into there, but to some degree, then we've been collaborating ever since, and I'm happy to be someone who's straddling between sort of design and implementation, and also research and education.
Well, I'm Eliane. I've been around, I think, a long time. I started playing Dungeons and Dragons 2nd edition in 1989, but I was in college. I wasn't that young. And I have like a weird story. I was graduated in genetics, but then I moved to illustration, and then I went through art theory, and I started working with Brazilian role-playing games as an illustrator and art director in 1991. And then I moved on to design, which is my master's and my doctor's. It's in design and working with role-playing games, researching role-playing games and creating role-playing games since a long time ago. Then I went to teach at the Federal University of Juiz de Fora in Minas into 2010. Yeah. And 2012 is when we met at Finland in an event. And then we started to working together, and here we are. And well, during the pandemic, a lot of stuff happened in my life, and I ended up in Cincinnati. I'm still getting used to the idea. And I'm in an unpaid leave from the University of Minas, but I'm now working at the University of Cincinnati. We started a course that was very, very successful, and then we're going to continue with this course in the new program, game design and animation.
In Minas?
No, here
it's
Here
Cincinnati.
in Cincinnati. Okay.
Yeah,
Nice.
I tried in Minas, but
Okay,
you know
I
how
understand.
things work.
Yes, I know. I understand how it
It's a
works.
struggle.
Yeah, it's a struggle.
But what's fun is that then we do recruit Tris de Fora students to our classes, so we collaborate with them virtually on all of our tabletop role-playing game projects.
That would be my actually my question for you now. Could you talk about your collaboration? What were you working together?
So we teach a course called Decolonial Game Design, and Decolonial Game Design has as its premise that games perpetuate colonial ideologies, and we would just we're not saving the world or solving colonialism with our games, but at least directly engaging with these long-term dynamics. Eliane has some great research that kind of summarizes a lot of the assumptions that underlie the games, and then we use both her own role-playing game system as well as her own practice of Minecraft hacking to kind of give them an introduction into how to take these tools and use them to create something different. And then by the end of the course, then they're collaborating with Tris de Fora students to create their own video game or analog game, to then be used in the world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's it.
That's really nice. Actually, this kind of subject that the colonial games and changing point of views of narratives and stories are things that interest myself. And as such, I see that interests a lot of game developers in Brazil and academics as well. So how could we get to know more about your work, your researches?
Well, you can find a lot of this work in analog game studies. In fact, all of us here have published in analog game studies, and analog game studies can be found at analoggamestudies.org. That is a project that emerged not only with the sort of video game scene being dominant in game studies in 2013 when we conceived of the project, but that also we wanted to not cede the analog games territory to a very specific variety of history bro who was taking up the space in analog games.
Sure.
And we wanted to do something different. Actually, this is the kind of history that Jason also specializes in, which is the thornier, uglier sides of things that are still made playable.
Yeah. Well, I have all my papers on my website, so you can.
Okay. After I'll ask for you for the links, so we can dispose it. Okay. And keeping in this line, I guess you talked a little bit about it, but let's be more specific. But what drives you to work with TTRPG and producing TTRPG?
Well, so far, for me, it's been the only type of game that allows me to be completely free to create characters and to role play. And it's what drives me more. It's the character conception, character creation, and all the subversions we can play with on that. So that's why I play a lot of other games too. I love video games, board games and card games, but the one where I really feel satisfied playing is the tabletop. I also enjoy a lot live action, like LARPs, but they are a little bit more difficult for me to play because I'm a little bit old and sometimes You know, like running, jumping, not exactly my among my skills anymore. Yeah, but that's why I prefer this. Basically, these two types of games, and that's the kind of thing that also drives my research interests. You know, like how easy is a game to be subverted.
Jason, could you tell us?
Yeah, for me, I view games as applied art. It's my way of expressing myself, and I can't not do it. I have to do it. It's just the tool that I've found to express myself in the same way that someone might paint or write poetry or make beautiful furniture. I just it's the thing that I do, and there are often things that I want to explore or talk about, and games are the best way for me to do that. And honestly, I've built my life around that. So that's my answer. How about you, Evan?
Well, you know, and this is going to highlight the Golden Cobra contest we started over 10 years ago. You know, I really think that when we're seeking for a way to understand systems, understand social behaviors, understand ourselves and through a different mirror, I think these games are really powerful. And I just, you know, being around sort of role playing for so long in my life, I can kind of see the richness that's there when I see the poverty of these other forms. And maybe it's just, you know, who I am, but really, you know, a extremely moving, say even 2-hour tabletop experience is going to linger with me much longer, and I'm going to mull it over much more than say an equal 2-hour video game experience, even of one of the most gorgeous video games ever made. It's just because my relationship is with the screen, and with other human beings, I can do a lot more, I think, and remember. One thing that's really crucial for me with tabletop and live action role play is I remember so much, and it's because I did something with my body or with other people.
That's great. Yes, I love the sociability of TTRPG, the things that become social, the dialectic involved in the construction, all the playing, all the game. And in talking about creation, as a game design teacher for TTRPG, I am always concerned about creative project methodologies. Could you talk a little bit about your process concerning themes, mechanics, styles? What concerns you about methods and creative production?
I'll answer that. So for me, I'm extraordinarily undisciplined. I am extremely irresponsible, and I am a bad game designer. I want to be better, and I want to do all those things better, but shamefully, I don't. So my process quite often is to have 6 games that I'm working on simultaneously that I will bounce around between as my interests wane and wax between those ideas, and they'll take a long time, and it's counterproductive, and I'm unfocused. And some of those games will never be finished, and others will get put aside because I don't have the tools to solve the problems that they suggest. And so, like, I have a very ad hoc, undisciplined approach to the methodology of creation. I can talk about the tools I'm most comfortable using, but honestly, I don't know that that's useful because everyone's going to sort of find their own set of tools that work for them, and the things that work for me.
Could you talk a little bit about tools?
Sure. Like the tools that I use most often are Google Docs, Google Spreadsheets. I use Adobe InDesign and Adobe Photoshop. And I think between those 4 things, that's where almost all of my work happens. Text files sometimes, but mostly what I'm doing is putting together a document, creating an outline, fleshing out that outline. If the particular project requires images, or it requires a layout, or it requires specific things, then I'll find the tools to do those pieces, but they're all built from that outline. So for example, if I have a game that uses cards in some way, well, there's going to be a spreadsheet that has all those cards laid out in a particular format so that I can export it into a page layout program, in my case, InDesign. But if I don't need that, I don't use that. So everything for me starts with a document that I'm creating an outline in and filling out pieces of that outline. That's my usual method. What about you, Eliane?
Well, I would say I am the opposite, and that is also a bad thing, because sometimes I get very anxious. I tend to be very methodic, like establishing. Even I even have a form. If you want something from me, I would say I have a form for that, and everyone knows my forms, my Google forms. And well, I share most of my creations. I mean, practically all of my creations with my husband, Carlos Klimic, which is the author of many role-playing games, Brazilian role-playing games. We work together, and he has more Jason's approach. So sometimes we fight, sometimes we work very well, because he has a lot of ideas and a lot of insights, and I don't. I'm very, I need a plan. And so usually I grab his ideas and then I develop a plan. I fill a form. And then we start to have something. So I would say that both ways are bad and good. Because they kind of complement each other. Because if you were to disperse, that happens. You cannot finish everything. And if you were to, you plan too much, sometimes you never finish also, because it's never good enough. So, right. And sometimes I only work in one project. And if I have to change perspective, it drives me crazy. So I think it's a good thing when you have a team with these different approaches. I mean, it's what makes things really happen. And so that's what I use. I use a lot of Google Forms, even for the character sheet. They are Google Forms, and I love Google Forms. And and I use a lot of Google presentations. I use a lot of Google tools, right? So Carlos would write Google Docs, and then I grab those stuff and I create a high concept for the game, and what should we develop based on that high concept, and define the rules and what kind of rules are better for that concept. Everything for us starts with what we want to talk about and for whom, basically. And then we go searching the best tools for it. And I use a lot of HTML, CSS. We nowadays we have a lot of all of our games are online, and we don't publish them in books anymore. They are all online, and I use a lot of resources like JavaScript for cards and dice, and now one of our games use like cowrie shells to determine the outcome of an action. I draw all the cowrie shells and created the JavaScript with I can draw the cowrie shells. Google presentations for narrative. For visual narrative, I use that a lot because it's easy to embed that on HTML, and it's easy to use, and it's cheap. I'm very concerned about the final cost of things. I always aim for free stuff, or for very low cost stuff, because the people I want to reach, I know, are people who doesn't have money. So I would love to create, like this awesome 3D video game, but I know that most of the people I'm interested in reaching, they would not have a computer that would, or a PlayStation or whatever, a console that would run that. So I stick to cheap stuff, and I'm kind of proud of it.
That's a real Brazilian concern, right?
Yeah.
South American concern. Yes.
Yeah.
That's
and I use a lot of Minecraft. Let's not forget about Minecraft.
I guess I could say now that Jason used game design as applied art, I would like to say that I approach game design as applied media interpretation. So that basically I'm projecting a certain argument about a work or a whole group of works. I really got into film studies through games because they had filmographies at the end of certain game books, and I just watched all those movies. I didn't realize that you weren't supposed. I didn't realize that most people don't go and just consider this like homework that you do. But I did that, and then that gave me a very good film education, which I didn't really know of until later in life. And what that meant then is every time I see a game, I read it and say, well, what are they saying about this? And I already in the early 2000s became much more attracted to those games that were actually having a say about the body of work that they were drawing from, especially genre fiction or what have you, than those that say, well, roll to hit and we'll just see what that does. Because that was not an interesting question for me by the end of the 90s of, do I damage the opponent? This is beside the point. I think what's interesting then is the tools that we all cling to are all sort of bound to these digital platforms that we have a very precarious relationship to. I'm writing about this topic at this very time, about how we are very codependent in an unhealthy way with platforms that could not care the least bit about what we are or what we're doing with them. And it's kind of always the case. I think from the beginning of role-playing games, we're using Xerox copiers to make, our own copies of role-playing games. And Eliane calculated that like an average, US board game is like 1 month Brazilian salary, for some Brazilians that she's trying to reach thereabouts. And so there was a kind of consciousness there of, oh no, we are a folk art. By folk art, but we are appropriating tools that probably were not intended for this thing and using them over here. And then also that then we aren't binding ourselves to particular paradigms or rules that eventually, they wear out their welcome and you discard them and do something else. Always, again, with the human in mind. So I guess my process is I usually write an abstract of the game, like this is my interpretation of this thing. And then the abstract informs the next step where I say, okay, I've got to game master this. How would I run this? and usually the game emerges from there. It's Jason's often solving these really complicated problems of human relationships, and I'm being like, okay, I'm gonna have 6 players who are going to ask me, we're all goats, right? They say, okay, we're all goats, and now but you're goats in a torture simulator. So now how I'm gonna run the goat torture simulator, and I work backwards from there. How do I introduce the players to this, etc. And this is how my brain works, is very much as a game master, always as a game master.
Sure.
I think it's valuable to hear those 3 points of view, particularly if you're someone who is sort of finding your way into design, because we just gave you 3 very different approaches, all of which are completely valid. And you're going to need to find your own way forward and find your own comfort within those paradigms.
Yes, in the end, it's about being comfortable with your own production, with your own way of working. But it's important to hear different points of view, even to find your own. Okay, I work more like Eliane or more like Evan, Jason, but try to find your own way in creation. Mm-hmm. But as one thing you said, Jason, when a game is finished, it's ready.
Well, I don't think a game is ever ready. You can know when you're done with a game for sure, but usually, in my experience, you're done with the game when you can't bear to look at it anymore. As opposed to you're done because it's perfect and flawless. Those are 2 very, very different things. And in my experience, you need people to help you come to that realization and to let it go, because it'll never be perfect. A thing that you make maybe is never going to be completely finished in your heart, but it needs to be finished in the world. And you may not be the best person to make that decision. That's how I feel about it.
Yeah, I agree. One of the ways I deal with that is just working with tools and platforms that I can anytime go there and change anything. So I've been working on some of my games for like years, like 10, 15 years. And I'm always going back there and changing something and, putting something, removing something. And it is what it is. So is it ready to be used? I don't know. Maybe that's for the players to decide if they can play with that thing, or if they think there's something missing and it's not playable yet. So I rely on that. I usually take my games to my students, so that because they cannot run away from it, and and then I use them as playtesters. It's awesome because there's always something missing, but it's always playable. And so, okay, I'm fine with that. So, yeah.
For me, the art form relies on emergent play dynamics. So I can't finish my game. It's the players that finish my game. So, like I hope that I can write something that then can be run by someone other than myself. That's my clearest guideline for a play testable version. But then, you kind of, as a game designer, are always in eternal play test and iteration, especially if say the scene shifts radically towards a different trend, or they solve a problem. And then you say that solves a problem with the game I was developing 8 years ago, and now I can revisit that, and then you insert that thing that's been invented now into your game. It absolutely doesn't work for another reason, and now you're kind of piecing the thing together Frankenstein-wise. But again, sort of the baseline is: do you have a minimally play testable vision of the game that someone that isn't you can run, but then the game is never finished and it's only again completed by the players actually playing it?
Yes, no, I totally agree with you. And actually, as TTRPG are display that we create together, we create stories and narratives together, it is always shifting, it's always changing and building itself, right? There is a game designer here in Brazil that I like a lot, that's Julio Matos. And he says that you need to make a lot of bad games till you do a good one. But you need your bad games. Do it.
Yeah, makes sense.
So so you reach a better one. Well, and changing a little bit of subject, not a lot, but I read some of Jason's games and noticed concern about safety in game, such as the use of safety tools. And this is a recurring theme in Brazilian RPG scene in discussions, and one that interests me a lot. I would like your opinion on the subject and why it's so important.
That's such a big topic. Yeah, I care a lot about safety. Personally, I want to present my work in the best way that's going to allow people to engage with it truthfully and in a way that's not going to cause harm to themselves or others. And obviously, I can't control that. All I can do is offer safer ways to approach the material. And since I'm often choosing to deal with things that are perhaps contentious or fraught, or that really do have the potential to cause some harm or some emotional distress, I just want to prime the participants in a way that will allow them to approach the material thoughtfully. And I recognize that I can't tell them what to do. I can't be there in the room with them when they choose to play it. But what I can do is provide some guidance and to use my own understanding of the material to provide some guardrails or some structure to the activity that might make it a little bit safer. And it's a very complicated thing because it's a moving target. The difference between Evan and our dear friends and myself in a room together, playing a game where we all love each other, we trust each other, and we have a shared history. It's very different from me offering that same game to a room full of total strangers who I just don't know what the boundaries are, where the things that might cause distress might be. I kind of have to guess a little bit. And so by incorporating tools that might make that experience a little bit safer, I'm at least asking people to be thoughtful about it. And I feel that that's a responsible thing to do. That's kind of where I'm coming from. But I'm anxious to hear what Eliane and Evan have to say about this too. This is a great topic.
Yeah, and it's very difficult. It's very difficult because it's totally subjective, especially when you're dealing with difficult topics like we do. I mean, I make games about racism. How am I gonna address racism in a safe way? I mean, the very concept of racism is unsafe. So, yeah, what I do, I explain that, or we sit down to play, introduce what we're going to play about, and I let people decide. Do you want to play that? You think you can deal with that? If you don't want to, that's okay. We play something else. But yeah, I wonder, how can I treat such topics in a safe way if the topic itself is very unsafe? So yeah, it's a conundrum.
And there's also, I mean, with particularly difficult topics, there's the issue of whether tools to make it safer are actually doing the opposite.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, if you have a tool that says, I don't want to, if I tap this card, I don't want to engage with this material, then in many ways that's great. But for some topics, maybe that's the wrong approach, you know, that maybe that's going to, so yeah, it's very complicated. Yeah. What do you think, Evan?
Well, I think it's important that you mentioned we run a lot for strangers. So the context really matters. A lot of our gameplay emerged from conventions, from running at universities, from running at game stores. And that's, again, you've got 5 random people, and now we're going to play our game about racism together. And I did that. I still, you know, I was one of the first game masters of Steal Away Jordan, and I've run that for many, many tables, including for my students to this day, where, you know, I say, I'm going to be your slave master, and you're all going to have names that I give you and your values, and really, really imposing on people to think about what that's like, and also to think about how they are going to resist, which is also part of the mechanics of the game. But I really am attracted to games that do force people not only out of themselves, but to grapple with the thorniness of what real people deal with in terms of navigating social reality, especially capitalist and imperial realities, and to the extent to which role-playing games actually, you know, are a very freeing opportunity for us to engage with that. But, you know, safety tools then abound, and none of them work, right? They're basically there for us in these kind of, we're playing with strangers settings to set a certain guideline. But of course, what we would prefer is a safety culture, not safety tools. A safety culture means we do value the players more than the game. We do then recognize when people are going through distress, or at least we have ways to check in. So if somebody is just bawling, we can say, are you bawling in character, or are you bawling as a person? Because I've had this come up several times where a player's active emotional distress was in character, right? But I needed to check in and make sure that that's the case, and having a tool for that where we're saying, okay, now we're out of character, what's going on here? Because even then people might say, oh, that's a ploy, you know, you're still using your game master power to try and break through my emotional sphere. So when we say this is complicated, it's because we just have really basic social roles that we take on that are difficult to then decouple when we want to address something like emotional safety. And to some degree, you know, the goal of some of our games is to go to a darker emotional place and sit there for a while. And that's just the way it is. So how do we then address that, you know, with, I would say, cutesy tools when none of them really are up to the depth of the challenge?
Yeah. I think safety tools, they work very well when you were gathering to play a game that is, you know, we're supposed to only have fun. And it's a game that it's not about something delicate or whatever, or, you know. And then safety tools are very important because there are people who tend to cross some boundaries that in that context would be very inconvenient. So I think that there were the safe tools. So I don't know, if you're playing Dungeons and Dragons in the most fun way possible, and then sometimes decide to do something questionable, then safety tools are important, and you can just draw a card and I don't go there.
And it's also often you just don't know. My favorite example of that was playing a game where at some point my character was going to kill a horse for some reason, and someone at the table tapped the X card in that case and was like, "No, please don't do that." I had no idea that was going to cause a problem. It was perfectly justified in the game, and it made sense for my character's motivation, and it was the right thing to do. But this person didn't want it, and I don't know why. I don't need to know why they tapped the card, and we just did a different thing. And for situations like that, those tools can lead to safer play, and I think it's a net gain. It's a net positive. So.
And I guess if we're talking about safety culture, there's also a such thing as a safety culture. For this, I'm referring directly to 1990s Vampire Larp. Actually, an aside project where we, are interviewing people and talking about sort of their stories from that period. Now that we have 30 years of distance for people to have grown up and processed that. And let me tell you, 1990s Vampire Larp traumatized a lot of people, and it drove them out of the hobby. It drove them to be very careful about where the relationships were and how they they deal with that. It almost drove me out of LARP altogether. And so there was a part of me that is still asking, what made it so unsafe? Why were we all so incredibly vulnerable to each other and also directly hurting each other? And there's a variety of very simple answers to that, sort of mixture between character and player competition, the clique culture that people tend to do when things are so unsafe that you then form these little cabals, or then you just try and befriend the game master as much as possible. But also watching those social dynamics helps you become a better game designer, I think, because then you realize, oh, this subsystem I'm implementing might produce some of those cultural dynamics. I still always think, if I introduce this thing, will I then jump to an unsafe play culture?
And still about safety, but in the same line of thinking, Eliane told now something I would like to ask you about. Told about game, about just to have fun. And I remembered a game that a friend of mine created, that it's about Brazilian military dictatorship. It wasn't fun at all.
No.
And it can't be. It's another kind of experience. It's another kind of aim. And when for you games stop being just for fun and start being, I don't know, not for fun, not funny or not serious. I don't like this serious expression, but in how it concerns as well as education, in education.
I think that the first thing you have to understand very well is what is fun. What is fun for me is probably totally different from what is fun for you. I mean, when I say just for fun, I mean you are not aiming at, I don't like the separations too. I mean, education should be fun, but it should be fun to learn. But what kind of fun? There is the fun that is just having a good time. And there is the fun of learning something, of discovering something, right? I think they're both fun, but they're different kinds of fun. So when you're playing without the intention of discovering something, creating something, or learning something different, if that's possible, you always learn and discover something when you're having fun. But there are some, I don't know, it's kind of a gradient, and there comes a time when the aim of the game is triggers some sort of heavy fun. Does that make sense? I mean,
sure.
I like horror movies.
Sure.
Horror movies are about suffering, and it's fun for me.
Sure.
Right? And if you're playing a game about military dictatorships, in which if you're playing as the military, your aim is to oppress, and if you're playing as the people who are going against it, you're going to suffer. But in the process, you are going to understand something deeper, and that's the fun of it, right?
Yeah.
Did I make myself clear? I don't know.
I think you did.
Yeah, sure.
I often talk about type 1 and type 2 fun, which I think is a really useful way to look at it. Type 1 fun is fun that we're having right now. We're enjoying what we're doing in the moment. And type 2 fun is not fun in the moment, but afterward you can look back on it and see value in it and experience pleasure from it. I think I make a lot of type 2 fun games. Not always, but sometimes. And, the idea that there's value in catharsis, there's value in, empathy, in knowledge, there's value in service. I think about your example, Eliane, of a game where somebody's playing the oppressor. You may not get a lot out of that, but it's an act of service to the other people who will get something out of that and need an oppressor. Mm-hmm. If they don't have that, it's not going to work. Mm-hmm. So there's lots of ways to parse that, I think. Mm-hmm. What do you think, Evan?
It's why you need good heels in, wrestling, right? Sorry, especially for fake professional wrestling, right? To distinguish it from the real wrestling activity. Fake, obviously, professional wrestling requires heels. It requires people who others beat up to look good, and now we have to ask ourselves as role players, is there a role I can see myself in an asymmetrical game, one where one player has clearly way more power than the other, but we're all kind of able to participate and enjoy it? And type 2 fun is then where a lot of us gravitate to, where it's like, I kind of want to just be grounded to the dirt and miserable, and that is going to also give great play to that other player, and I can sense that. And now I'll enjoy not only the Gestalt experience, but maybe I'll also enjoy something about being grounded to the dirt and, spat on. And I realize that that's not like everybody's cup of tea. And of course, people can have like sexual projections onto this, but I think it's much more human for us to say we can take on multiple roles, and a good role player can read the room, see, oh, here are all the different roles here. This person wants to play the hero, which means the rest of us are not the hero. And are we all okay with that? And and then when you have like 6 or even 9 heroes in the room, that makes for a really weird dynamic. I mean, that's like your classic Dungeons and Dragons party, and to some degree it is like everybody's fantasy is all kind of butting up against each other, like these bubbles around, like everyone's got a little bubble outfit and they're all butting up against each other. I'm the strongest one. No, I'm the strongest one. But actually we're all on a team and we all get along and everything's fine. And I think about a lot of works of fiction and think, well, what's really going on? And of course, people, engage in fanfic dynamics, and they're like, pairing off their characters secretly or something like that. But, I just want there to be some tension, some power imbalance, and some enjoyment of that dynamic.
Yeah, there is here I go with my methodology. There's a guy who's been guiding me from a long time, since my master's. His name is Roland Barthes. I don't know if you heard about him.
Yes.
He was a French guy. Yeah. He has this concept of plaisir et jouissance, which is pretty difficult to translate. It's very easy to understand when he explains, but it's very difficult to translate. So plaisir, he says that it's when you have fun with something that that you are familiar with, and it's not going to surprise you in any, like freaky way. And the jouissance is when you have this freak pleasure, this freak discoveries, and it's this freaky, sublime stuff. I think these two concepts, I've been working with these two concepts, and we definitely work with the jouissances. We aim at that. Not always it happens, but when it happens, it's very, very, very sublime, let's say. And I think these two concepts, they are very good even to decide when to use the safety tools and when not. Because if you're aiming at jouissance, you should expect freaking out, some suffering, and if you are expecting plaisir, it should be safe, because otherwise it could become a jouissance, but that creates a trauma. Joussances, they tend to create traumas, but when they are, good, they're good traumas, if that's possible. Mm-hmm. They create something else. They open up something inside of you that changes you in some way, and the plaisir doesn't. The plaisir is just good, but it doesn't change you, right? Yeah. I don't know if you guys agree with that.
Yeah. It actually was a great use of these concepts for us to understand. Yeah. And well, we are reaching the end. I'll have just one last question before we end this time with you. And what about education and participation? I tend to understand RPG as a medium through play that is collaborative and participatory. And I would like to know, in your opinion, how can RPG be a mediator of education, or can it be?
Absolutely. Yep. It is. It's a great educational tool. It is also maddening insofar as you can't set curriculum goals around it. You kind of need to let go and say, this is a game with an intention. And of course, the students can read between the lines of that intention, but they're completing it with their play. So whatever play comes out, we still have to kind of validate, even though even if it is a hot mess. And that then in validating that, I think the ultimate achievement in especially games education is for students to play a game that's dealing with a certain topic. And they, of course, are learning about that certain topic. And then you ask them, now you design a game that's response to this game. And that way it reinforces one of the most important concepts for me, which is game design is just a dialogue. It's just a conversation over many, many years of us building these kind of semi-broken things that we keep putting out in the world and seeing if they work. And then someone else plays this semi-broken thing and they're like, oh yeah, let's try it. Well, I'm going to try this, but on Mars. And now we have, a different entry in there. And so I want students to just enter into the conversation, but not, for us to set, 7 curricular goals and saying this is going to teach all this content and that then we give them a test afterwards. That is not the way. The way is to have them design another game.
Yeah, that's interesting, Evan. I see how as an academic you struggle with the idea of finding a rubric for evaluating people's play. That just seems like a fool's errand. But it seems to me that you can also create empathy, create understanding that then you can support with other material, right? So you play a game where they get to experience a historical moment and then surround that with primary sources for them to explore with having embodied that. And like you all tell me, I'm not an educator, but that seems like an approach that would be also a really good use of role-playing games.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I've been struggling with that because I've been coordinating the course licensure. Is that how I call it? Licensure in arts, to be an art teacher. So in Minas. So I have this very peculiar experience of teaching both game design and how to create learning tools, sometimes trying to put them together. Well, I think, first of all, I'm very heretic in education. I've always been. I think the whole system is, it's not working. And when you're talking about like high school or middle school, whatever, you can do anything in 15 minutes. The first thing I always discuss with my students is the first thing you have to do is try to change the system. And then you create your own techniques, because you can't do anything good in 50 minutes. But within that, what I would suggest is that kind of approach. Let them play, give good resources, good references, and see what they come up with that. And then you take what they did and try to apply to something more traditional. I don't know, like write a text about, make a game about, make a drawing about, do whatever you can do in those blasted 50 minutes. But yeah, I think that it's important when you're gonna use a game, it's important to make at least a minimum relation between what the game is about and what could this game teach you, what could you learn from that game. And then you're gonna say, oh, I could teach math using this game, I could teach history, I could teach geography, and I think that's the role of the teacher, to see what can I offer the students through this game, right? But building a game to teach these or that usually doesn't work. it's the serious game stuff that, that usually is kind of, oh, this is it. Here we go. Like, let's play a didactic game. And the students look at you and,
Oh, we don't want to. Yeah. It's boring. Yeah.
it's boring. So, yeah, I think there's still this big challenge in the educational field is to understand that you can use a game, you can even create a game with some specific purposes, but it has to be a game first and not,
Yes.
a learning tool. It has to be fun. It has to be a game. Hello. Got it.
And Evan would like to talk about it.
Yeah, I think one thing about role-playing games is the role and the character, right? And if you're adopting a historical role, it is very hard to feel nothing about that character after you've played it. So that's, I find, is very useful for literary and historical and film education. So I make a lot of adaptation games and also help with Larps that do that. We just did a 1519 Holy Roman Empire election with about 50 players between Discord and the class. And I played Guillaume Boudet, who I really had not researched on him. He made the Bibliothèque Française and some other major achievements, but I really didn't know what to think of this guy, and Wikipedia was terrible on him. And so I was just like, well, I was going to role play the Wikipedia entry as if it were a character sheet. And that was still really moving. I was still profoundly moved by this character, even though I really was playing the Wikipedia entry. And now I can't ever go back to the time before I played this character. And I think that's really powerful with connecting students, engaging them in our content, no matter what we do.
Well, we are reaching our time, so thank you a lot for your time here for our talk. I enjoyed it a lot. I learned a lot, and I guess everyone that will watch this will feel as I do right now. And well, would like to give some last words, some tips, some recommendations, books, movies, games, anything.
Oh my goodness. What are you playing right now, Eliane?
Well, Minecraft. And we play our own games a lot, we are developing, because we are developers, so we usually playing what we're developing. And we played some of Evan's games, which we had, it was a lot of fun, and mostly in the Jusance way. But we're diving deep into this setting we are building now, which is the Terra Nova setting, which is the New Earth, in which we are now burning our minds and how to develop a fantasy setting that would be based on maroons and quilombos, but still being a fantasy setting. And we're having a good time. We have some faithful players that gives us a lot of feedback, and yeah, that's what we mean, and that's what we have time to do, because other than that, it's just paying bills and that kind of stuff. So
Yes.
How about you, Evan? Other than 50-person Holy Roman Empire.
Well, yeah. So we just got done with the Holy Roman Empire game, and that was glorious. I'll send you back your Pope hat. I'm doing Facing the Titan, which
cool.
is a Swords Without Master game where you're kind of up against this Dark Souls style like Titan, but it's also about selling the mystery and grandeur of the thing before you kill it. And then I also am doing Prism, which is the mermaid romance game. It's a mermaid polycule romance game, and that's an ongoing campaign I think we've now had for almost 3 years. It's really a lot of fun, totally diceless. And also I'll shout out Desperation here, which I keep running at different places. This is a game about a town or a ship that is all where most of the people are going to die. It's designed by Bully Pulpit Games, and it is a wonderful educational tool, especially for those kids who really like horror. Like, they're the ones who immediately see what's going on, and both they get the lesson and they have a blast with it.
Oh, thank you. You'll be pleased to know that I've written 2 new Desperation sets. So hopefully soon we'll have more coming. And I'm only playtesting my own stuff right now. We have the next game that we'll be releasing is called Zhenya's Wonder Tales, which is sort of Slavic, Eastern European, Baltic mythology distilled down into a sort of powered by the apocalypse format. We've got beautiful art by Momentos. Here's some of the art. That's the King of the Snakes.
Oh, cool.
Beautiful.
Yeah, we're really, really happy with the way the art turned out. So it's all card driven and super, super fun. You tell these fairy stories in about an hour, and that's going to be great. So that's what I'm up to.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being here, for giving your time and, added to this discussion. And now I guess, for people that in the future will watch this, thank you for watching. And links will be below. We'll give all these recommendations for you all. And, thank you very much. Let's end here.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you for having
Thank
us.
you.
Thank you.
It's
Bye.
a pleasure.
Muito bom, muito bom. Também, Matheus. Pessoal, excelente palestra. Estou aqui com a Mônica, que participou, né, ativamente da conversa, e com o Matheus, que também é da coordenação do evento. Mônica, qual que foi a sensação de entrevistar esse time bacana de designers?
Então, né, eu até coloquei no Twitter esses dias, né, é um privilégio, né, conseguir fazer essa conversa, né, com pessoas tão incríveis, com bastante coisa, um background, né, gigantesco, bastante coisa para contribuir, bastante coisa para dizer, e que já, então, falaram, né, e fizeram muitas coisas, né, muito legais. Para mim foi uma oportunidade maravilhosa e um grande aprendizado, mas eu acho que a gente pode aqui dar uma discutida sobre alguns pontos aí que o pessoal do chat levantou, né? E enfim, ver algumas perguntas. Eu não sei o que vocês acham, como é que estão sendo essas dinâmicas aí ao fim dessa apresentação.
Você tem alguma pergunta em específico que você queira destacar?
Tem uma que até foi um pouquinho discutida aqui, que eu gostaria de ver, aqui do Felipe Braga, que ele colocou sobre o jogo é pensado para provocar a crítica, mas algumas poucas pessoas leem literalmente e acham que é apologia, né? Como evitar o avesso? Eu vou concordar, né, com o que o pessoal colocou, que as intenções precisam ser claras. Eu acho que isso vem também muito, Felipe, de que hoje em dia a gente recebe muita informação, a gente recebe muitos subtextos, muitas metalinguagens, né, vindas, muitos discursos, muitas fake news, vindo de todos os lugares, né, de lugares diferentes, e acho que cada vez mais se necessita de clareza. E as pessoas estão procurando por clareza. Não é à toa que esses vídeos de explicando o final de tal série, né, faz tanto sucesso, enfim, né, nas mídias, TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, o que for. As pessoas precisam de clareza. Será que é isso mesmo que eu entendi? Será que eu quis entender alguma coisa? Será que há alguma coisa para entender? Porque a possibilidade de leitura, ela é gigantesca, né? Tem um autor, ele trabalha mais com literatura, né, nacional, se chama Anatol Rosenfeld, e ele diz que para uma obra ser ficção, uma das características, uma das possibilidades necessárias é que seja passível à interpretação e de criação de novos conceitos, de novas ideias em cima disso. E o RPG traz muito disso. Só que a partir do momento que a gente tem essa capacidade de interpretar e criar em cima, e a gente quer dar um destino, a gente quer dar uma linha de pensamento, a gente precisa ser claro. Senão, pode sair dos eixos, né, com muita facilidade. Um tempo atrás eu trabalhava com um autor de RPG e ele dizia que ele queria que os livros, que os RPGs deles, enfim, a série, tivesse uma pequena linha de romance, né, de uma lógica que vai seguindo de um livro para outro. Diz, ok, é legal, mas será que tu não deveria, então, estar escrevendo literatura? Porque, assim como responderam aí no chat, a partir do momento que a gente cria um jogo, e mesmo com que tem um cenário, que tem personagens, as pessoas que vão jogar vão fazer o que querem daquilo, vão se utilizar como querem. Então, se tu tem uma intencionalidade ali, ela precisa ser clara. E mesmo assim, a gente não tem a garantia de que vai ser evitada. As pessoas vão usar o nosso material da forma que convier a elas, né? Mesmo a gente não tenha esse controle, mesmo que a gente queira que seja outra coisa, que a gente idealize que vai cair em outro discurso. Enfim, é uma coisa muito delicada, né? Então, clareza seria, acho que, o essencial.
O que você falou é interessante, que uma das formas de você entender o RPG é como se fosse uma grande criação coletiva, né? Você está contando uma história como se fosse um pequeno brainstorm. E numa atividade como essa, a gente, a princípio, entende que a gente vai, de fato, e a gente está aberto, né, a receber colaborações, né, a receber ideias diversas. Quando você está numa proposta talvez um pouco diferente, né, de talvez escrever uma história já definida, talvez não seja isso que você esteja querendo, né? Às vezes, como você mesmo falou, às vezes o que você quer é escrever um romance. Já numa atividade coletiva, não. Você, por bem ou por mal, você está querendo receber novas ideias, né? Você quer incorporar novas ideias. Por bem, né? Porque isso faz parte, né, da proposta, né? Se assim você entende. Mas por mal é que, assim, você não sabe o que vai vir, né? Você não sabe para que caminho que a história vai, né? A ideia do RPG por si só é você deixar isso fluir, né? A ideia das histórias abertas, né? Que, inclusive, a própria Eliane é uma das pessoas que defende essa ideia. Ela não comentou isso na fala dela, não estou falando por ela, mas como eu fui aluno dela, né? Fui orientando da Eliane, e ela foi uma das organizadoras de um outro evento, né, no Brasil, que inclusive se chamava Histórias Abertas, era um evento que ela organizou pela PUC do Rio, enquanto ela era acadêmica da PUC do Rio, que conversava com os antigos simpósios de RPG e Educação. Eu sei que ela tem essa ideia das histórias abertas, que faz parte do nosso conceito de RPG, mas eu concordo plenamente com você, Mônica. Eu acho que se não for essa proposta, isso tem que ficar muito claro, né? Isso tem que ficar muito, muito bem explicado no combinado. Matheus?
Reforçando aí o que a Mônica falando e uma fala que o Jason colocou no vídeo, né? Pensando que o game design tem essa proposta de diálogo e o quanto está marcado, inclusive, na própria história dos RPGs, né? Uma das grandes revoluções que a gente tem no game design é a partir do momento em que os designers passaram a colocar a proposta de seu jogo entranhada com as mecânicas das regras, né? O quanto isso mudou a forma de fazer RPG, de jogar RPG, a ponto de eles serem pensados como experiências direcionadas, né? Sobretudo esses RPGs de designers como Jason Morningstar e tal, RPGs mais indies, né? Mas mesmo RPGs maiores, mais convencionais, eles também fazem sentido com uma certa intenção, que é a intenção dos game designers, e que as mecânicas do jogo propõem. Então, você pode tentar, como foi tentado muito nos anos 90 e no começo dos anos 2000, ali jogar Star Wars com D&D, né? Você pode, né? Como vocês falaram aí mais cedo, a gente, e os autores falaram também no vídeo mais cedo, a gente não tem controle nenhum sobre o que as pessoas vão fazer com o jogo. Então, se a pessoa quer jogar Star Wars com D&D, ela pode, né? Vai funcionar? Não sabemos, depende muito de como que vai ser essa experiência. Mas o jogo e os designers do jogo estão dando ferramentas para que essa experiência aconteça de uma maneira proficiente? Não. Isso a gente pode afirmar com certeza que não. Então, essa intencionalidade, ela é uma proposta. Assim como um mestre, quando chega para jogar uma mesa de RPG e ele tem uma proposta que vai ser um gancho para os jogadores criarem personagens e agirem a partir disso, o game design também apresenta uma proposta que os jogadores vão comprar ou não, que tem a ver com essa intenção que há e com essa necessidade de clareza que a Mônica reforçou aqui.
Só para chamar a atenção um pouquinho para talvez quem esteja aí no chat que não está por dentro dessa questão, é que, em um dado momento, né, na história dos RPGs, a gente tinha duas opções de caminho, né, que era você criar sistemas que fossem genéricos, ou seja, a ideia de se criar sistemas que servissem para todo tipo de ambientação, para todo tipo de contexto, né, e um outro caminho que dizia o contrário. Não, você precisa ter regras específicas para cada situação, que modelem especificamente cada situação, o que seria o equivalente a você ter um sistema para cada atividade que você for propor. Eu acho que são extremos muito, né, limitantes, né? Eu acho que são os dois lados extremos. E, em algum momento, a gente tem as propostas que são aí intermediárias, talvez um pouco indo mais para o genérico, algumas indo mais para o específico. Mas eu concordo que, hoje em dia, pelo menos a parte dos sistemas indie, né, eles tendem a ser mais focados na sua proposta, que foram alguns exemplos que houveram na própria palestra. Se eu não me engano, foi na fala do Evan, que a questão de você ter, né, mecanismos bem específicos para controlar alguma qualidade específica do tema que você está tentando trabalhar. Né? Claro que isso não é uma regra, mas é uma ferramenta muito interessante você focar aquele ponto daquele assunto que você está tratando. Nós estamos falando de um tema sensível, por exemplo, de escravidão, qual que vai ser dentro do sistema, né, o que você vai poder trabalhar, né, quantificar, ou até mesmo poder ter parâmetros para você dizer o quanto que você está avançando numa determinada característica ou num determinado conceito. Isso é mais específico, né? Mônica, tem alguma outra fala que apareça no texto que você lembre aí, que seja relevante da gente...
Eu acho que tem uma coisinha, mas eu vou só... Eu acho que antes, de repente, de eu escolher o assunto, vou perguntar aqui no chat, ver se alguém tem alguma coisa que eu gostaria que fosse comentada, tem alguma dúvida, né? Já que a gente está nesse momento que é interativo, vamos valorizar aí a ferramenta, né, da interatividade e dar esse tempo aí, ver se alguém tem alguma coisa que eu gostaria que fosse comentada. Se não, eu tenho sim uma coisinha. Não sem ter o que dizer, sem ter o que conversar, a gente não vai ficar, né? Mas eu estou lendo aqui o que o pessoal está falando, e é bem isso, assim, a gente não tem... A partir do momento que a gente escreve alguma coisa, a gente está passando pela nossa intencionalidade de alguma forma, não existe como ser neutro, né? Independente, seja numa mecânica de matar e pilhar, né? Seja no uso de uma arma, seja optar por não violência, todas são opções que passam por um viés do autor, né? Sempre há uma intencionalidade, a gente não é vazio, né? Enfim, de julgamentos, né? De filtros. Bom, como não está surgindo nada até o momento, tá? Eu vou fazer só um comentário, né? A partir de coisas, então, que a gente escutou. Bem lá no início da fala, né? Quando falou de metodologias, e muita gente aí se conectando, né? Com o... Pode perguntar, Latarão. Fica de boa, tá? Eu vou ler. Mas é o Jason, né, que fala que é um processo completamente caótico. Isso é engraçado, né? Porque cada pessoa tem o seu jeito e a sua organização. Mas no final, eu gosto de falar, eu sou muito caótica fazendo as coisas também, mas eu gosto de falar de um caos organizado. Porque uma hora a gente vai ter que organizar isso aí, né? E o meu caos, ele é tão organizado que se mexem no meu caos, eu perco o que eu estou fazendo. Né? É aquela coisa assim, eu sei que tá tudo ali naquela pilha de bagunça. Se alguém pegou e tirou uma coisinha daquela pilha de bagunça, eu já não sei onde está, porque eu sei que está no meio daquela pilha. Só para, enfim, dar um exemplo. Mas deixa eu ver aqui. Opa,
essa última pergunta que foi destacada aí, para comentar sobre a questão dos jogos sérios, né, como desafio atingir a ludicidade.
Tá, eu acho, uma questão muito pessoal minha, eu não gosto do termo jogo sério. Eu acho que a gente tem que começar por aí, porque se tu tá partindo de um pressuposto que existe um jogo sério, existe um jogo que não é sério. Todo jogo é sério. No sentido de que, se a gente está se colocando num compromisso de jogar nesse momento, ele é sério para aquele momento, né? Para aquela função, nem que seja uma seriedade da diversão, uma seriedade catártica, mas é por aí, né? Acho que é bem complicado isso. Mas, se tu tá querendo falar com um jogo sério, esse jogo que tem, de repente, um objetivo educacional, que tem uma certa temática mais sensível e como atingir a ludicidade, a gente tem que, primeiro, no momento, compreender que nem toda ludicidade vai ser essa ludicidade divertida no sentido recreativo, né? Mas determinar desafios, né, conflitos que precisam ser resolvidos durante esse jogo, a fim de atingir esse tema, com muitas aspas, sério, que se pretende tramar, e tornar isso interessante. Agora, qual é a resposta para isso? Não há como dar uma resposta certa. Cada tema vai ter a sua particularidade, né? Então, esperar receita de bolo. Eu sei, então, que depois daqui, por exemplo, vai ter a fala do Valpassos, e ele já anunciou, eu não dou receita de bolo, né? Não tem receita de bolo. O que a gente vai ter, então, são coisas para pensar, né? Que vão ter vieses específicos, mas sempre pensando nessa questão do desafio, né, e do conflito como que a gente vai apresentar essa temática e tornar ela interessante aí nesse sentido. O que pode ser interessante aí nesse sentido, para não se tornar, né, enfadonho de alguma forma.
Sobre essa questão dos jogos sérios, né, eu acho que, inclusive, não é nem o termo não é nem consenso, né? É um termo que é usado um pouco mais, né, nos jogos digitais, né? Inclusive, tem um que compete um pouco com ele, que é o jogo com propósito, né? Tem gente que fala que são coisas diferentes, jogo com propósito é diferente de jogo sério, aí tem todas as definições, tem todos os teóricos que defendem uma coisa, outra, mas a sensação que eu tenho é que a origem do termo jogo sério, né, vem da questão conceitual de que ludicidade, né, a própria definição de ludicidade, tem a ver com você estar participando da atividade, claro que espontaneamente, como dizem os primeiros teóricos, mas o importante é o jogo ser divertido, né? A ludicidade ele tem a ver intrinsecamente com diversão. Aí criou-se essa ideia de que se o jogo não é pura e única e exclusivamente para se divertir, então ele é um jogo que tem um propósito além de divertir. E se ele tem um propósito além de divertir, ele é um jogo com propósito, né? Não sou eu que estou dizendo, né? É uma das justificativas de por que escolheram esse nome. Isso tem a ver também com o jogo sério, né? Se não é divertido, então tudo aquilo que não é divertido é sério. Eu tenho, né, algumas críticas a isso, porque eu acho que todo jogo intrinsecamente social, né, educativo, e você, apesar de usar eles para coisas que não sejam necessariamente só diversão, isso não quer dizer que ele também não pode ser divertido. Mas eu concordo plenamente com você que eu também não gosto desse termo, eu também sou do time que se possível, não nem utilizaria. Acho que a gente tem, assim, pouquíssimo tempo para talvez discutir mais alguma coisa, até porque daqui a pouquinho, né, já vai ter uma outra atividade.
Dá uma olhada aí, eu vou dar uma reforçada nessa questão aí do jogo sério, que eu acho que também... Vai procurando outra pergunta enquanto isso ali no chat, eu acho que tem mais uma pessoa que perguntou ali, o Guilherme, se eu não me engano. E eu acho que também é um pouco... A gente pode se libertar dessas definições que às vezes são muito colonizadas, né? E Serious Games é uma área de pesquisa gigante na gringa, né? E aqui a gente tem talvez outras perspectivas e é menos importante talvez ficar dizendo se é jogo sério, se é jogo com propósito, se é jogo educativo, se é jogo pedagógico, essas diversas definições, e pensar como que a gente pode fazer com que esses jogos sejam mais proficientes no que a gente está se propondo a fazer com eles. Ou seja, sem deixar de ser jogo, né? Ou seja, se a gente está pensando ele num sentido educacional, como fazer com que, de fato, uma aprendizagem possa ser pensada ou refletida a partir deles, e que, ao mesmo tempo, o jogo proponha ou não quebre a lógica lúdica, né? Que foi o que a Eliane colocou na fala. Ela diz, olha, quando a gente chega para os estudantes e já diz que a gente vai jogar um jogo educativo, a primeira tendência dos estudantes é rejeitar isso, porque o começo, né, digamos, de pensar jogos sérios ou jogos educativos, numa lógica escolar, assim, sobretudo na lógica escolar da educação básica, é de que não é um jogo de verdade, né? Vamos pegar o jogo sério mais antigo, talvez, seja o quiz, né? O que é o quiz, se não uma sequência de uma prova animada, né? Uma sequência de perguntas. Então, é claro que hoje em dia a gente já tem jogos educativos e sérios mais complexos do ponto de vista do game design, mas justamente porque eles são mais complexos do ponto de vista do game design, eles se tornam jogos mais divertidos e, por isso, mais proficientes em fazerem, em proporem, né, situações de aprendizagem. Que é uma coisa que, inclusive, a Eliane sabe bem, que ela já é autora de alguns desses jogos, né. Acho que é isso. Viu ali a pergunta do Guilherme, não?
Eu acho que acabou o nosso tempo aqui, já avisaram. Mas o que eu estou fazendo? Eu estou tomando a liberdade de copiar aqui algumas das perguntas que foram feitas. Se der tempo ao longo da semana, eu gravo um videozinho, nem que passe nos stories ali do evento, tá? Para tentar dar uma resposta. Acho que é muito complicado a gente ter respostas para as coisas, assim. Mas, enfim, estimular aí o questionamento, a discussão, mas tentar dar um viés de resposta aí para algumas coisas que foram perguntadas, tá? Eu estou aqui, estava atenta aqui que eu estou copiando as perguntas.
Beleza. Acabou? Acabou, né? Gente, muito obrigado. Queria agradecer ao Jason, ao Evan, à Eliane, né? Também à Mônica, que está aqui conosco, por também ter mediado essa atividade. Queria agradecer a todo mundo que esteve aqui presente, todo mundo que participou no chat. A Mônica está se comprometendo aí a dar uma olhadinha no chat que talvez tenha ficado para trás. A gente vai tentar dar um feedback para todo mundo, mesmo que ainda não aqui no ao vivo. Queria convidar todo mundo, né, a tomar uma aguinha. Daqui a pouco tem uma nova atividade, um workshop com o Valpassos. É um workshop aqui que eu ouvi dizer que está sensacional. Valpassos é quase que uma unanimidade, uma pessoa assim, de coração de todo mundo da área. Então, acredito que vocês vão gostar, não vão se arrepender de participar. Lembrando, o simpósio está acontecendo agora, de 8 a 16 de junho de 2024. Você pode, talvez, estar assistindo em algum outro momento no futuro, né? Abraço para você do futuro. Mas dê uma olhada nos outros conteúdos, tem muito conteúdo legal, não só que já aconteceu ontem, que vai acontecer durante a semana, que você pode acompanhar. A lista de presença ficou no chat, vocês têm 24 horas para poder assinar lá, para poder participar, quem se inscreveu, e para ganhar o certificado. Também está no chat um link para o grupo de WhatsApp, né, dos participantes do simpósio, para a gente trocar ideia. Por enquanto o grupo está fechado, mas logo a gente vai abrir ele para a gente montar aí a nossa comunidade. Mais alguma coisa que eu tenha esquecido, Matheus?
Não, acho que é isso aí mesmo, Léo. Fiquem com a gente aí, pessoal, que ainda tem muita coisa boa aí, muito diálogo massa que vai acontecer. E fiquem
Mônica,
atentos.
você que manda, por favor, fecha a live.
Bom, obrigada, né, por terem assistido essa entrevista, por estarem aqui conversando. E, assim, vai ser uma semana intensa de trabalho, tem muita coisa legal. Espero que estejam gostando, que aproveitem, né? E, enfim, mais uma vez, obrigada por estarem aqui.
Obrigado, tchau, pessoal.